All right, well, let's go ahead down to the stage and take a look at our two competitors, Steven Morioka and Rajan Ball. No strangers to competitive Pokemon, but take a look at those teams. I'm loving the Dondozo Tatsugiri throwback there, and we have an Ursaluna, but a Trick Room setter that I don't think any of us predicted on the graphic, which kind of surprising, honestly.
It is. You know, we did see so much success with Ursaluna and Porygon 2 in EUIC just a week ago, especially with Nils taking home the title with it. But we see Rajan opt for the Indeedee female instead, which is very much a supportive Pokemon, does have access to Trick Room. But when you usually think about Indeedee, I think a lot of times you're not thinking, okay, primary Trick Room setter for my team that's going to enable the rest of my Pokemon to operate in Trick Room. Usually it's with the Follow Me, the Helping Hand, and the Psychic Surge, which I think the use of that Psychic Surge maybe not as great in this coming match. We'll come back to that, though. Let's talk about Steven's team right now, though, Gabby.
Yeah, well, being able to block priority, I think, is going to be important for Rajan, given that Steven Morioka has this combination of the Dondozo Tatsugiri curly form, Dragonite and Chien-Pao, who have great synergy together as well, and then a bit of a twist. You know, Glimmora, I think, was very popular on Dondozo teams because it allows you to poison the opponent, slow the gameplay down, but then Gouging Fire is that final support Pokemon. Also, fun fact, Steven Morioka, one of the original VGC competitors, I believe, and I did not fact check this, but I'm going to say it anyways, I believe he was also one of the people who qualified for the Journey Across America Tour in 2006, which predates VGC technically. So shout outs to the OG over there. Let's take a look at Rajan's team, though, as these trainers are already in team preview. They're ready to go.
Yeah, we are no shortage of action here in Orlando. Rajan is running the Indeedee female, Urshifu Rapid Strike, Tornadus Incarnate, Ogerpon Hearthflame, Fluttermane, and Ursaluna. And like we kind of hinted at earlier, Indeedee is not kind of the premier Trick Room setter you might expect with this Ursaluna. And even looking at the team sheet there, it's not even Trick Room. There is actually no Trick Room here.
Yeah, and that's the surprise, right?
Yeah.
Like, typically, you would expect an Ursaluna Indeedee female to just have that Trick Room mode on the team. But instead, it's purely Tailwind, Icy Wind speed control between the Tornadus Incarnate and the Fluttermane. And that Urshifu Rapid Strike as well, a little bit different with the Choice Band, with the Terra Poison and Poison Jab. So, great damage into any Terra Fairy type Pokemon, just like Raging Bolt, like we were talking about earlier on in the pre-show. But in this matchup in particular, I don't think you necessarily bring the Ursaluna. I think it would be too much of a liability with all the water type Pokemon on Steven's side of the field.
That Urshifu set is really cool. If you look at Rajan's team, and if you specifically look at the Ursaluna, Ursaluna really does not enjoy playing against Rillaboom.
I'm sorry.
Can we ignore that?
It's too early for a pun that strong, my people. Whoever wrote that, was that an Evan? I feel like that's an Evan.
I can see that, yeah.
Evan, we love you, but it's too early for to be a reliever. I'm sorry.
The Urshifu, it's really cool. It's Terra Poison, which is great defensively, and it also helps a lot against Rillaboom, which, again, Ursaluna really hates going up against. You can see there's a lot of like anti-Rillaboom techs on Rajan's team between the Psychic Surge, the Tornadus, the Ogerpon Hearthflame. So there's a lot of things that kind of deter it. Luckily for Rajan, there is no Rillaboom on Steven's side of the field, but you do have to worry about the potential Dondozo Tatsugiri combination. Not coming off right off the bat, though. Dragonite and Glimmora, the leads of choice into Rajan's Urshifu and Fluttermane.
Yeah, a bit of a unique take, I think, for both these trainers. You know, looking at Rajan's team, on paper at least, I would have expected to see that Urshifu and the Tornadus come out on turn 1 of game 1, just because they're such, you know, tried and true partners together.
Right.
But that Fluttermane still offers that speed control, offers some great damage into the Dragonite in particular for Steven, so may force a Terastallization or an early switch. The Glimmora as well, I feel like, is in a very good position here to either set up those Toxic Spikes after a couple of hits from that Urshifu, or just go straight for a Mortal Spin to get that poison down early.
Getting that poison in early would be great. We did kind of see on the screen there, Steven does have the Dondozo and Tatsugiri in the back, so potentially getting some Toxic Debris, Toxic Spikes set up in the face of this physical Urshifu, or getting a Mortal Spin off to poison the 2 on the field could be useful. Not just yet, though, an Icy Wind.
Yeah, and a good thing to note here, that is an assault vest on that Dragonite if you missed it earlier on during team preview, not taking any damage from that icy wind. Here comes a rapid strikes though. It will connect twice, which means the Glimmora will be able to set up both layers of those toxic spikes needed to get the strong poison whenever Rajan sends in a Pokemon that will make contact with the ground. So that's a very important thing to keep an eye on later, especially knowing that Steven could slow down the game's pace earlier on or later on.
Great call out there. The fact that these first rapid surging strikes did not KO is big, and also a critical hit aerial ace, not able to KO that Urshifu as well, so a huge clutch survival there from that Urshifu. Rajan maintains his Pokemon advantage 4-3, and now the Dondozo comes in to replace the fallen Glimmora. Unfortunately, didn't get much done other than setting up those 2 layers of toxic spikes, but again, because it did have to connect twice, that surging strikes, the Pokemon coming in on Rajan's side will be toxic poisoned. I think only the Tornadus on Rajan's end is not touching the ground, and I guess the Ursaluna doesn't really mind because he got guts anyway, but nothing else really wants to take that toxic poison.
No, and I think what's also important here to note is that because the Urshifu lived with such little health, Rajan can't necessarily switch it back out and in unless he would wait until a Pokemon fainted to switch it back on the field. Because if you were to switch it in mid-turn, it would become poisoned, and then the poison would knock it out in the in-between phase.
And you also have to worry about the Rocky Helmet on this Dondozo.
That too.
It is not running leftovers like you might expect. It is Rocky Helmet instead to punish physical attackers, much like this Urshifu.
All right, well, Dragonite will leave the field, which means there's only one Pokemon that can take its place. It's the Tatsugiri making its glorious return once again, going to immediately take command of that Dondozo for some hefty stat boosts.
The attack, the special attack, the special defense, the speed, the defense all go up by 2 stages thanks to the commander ability in that Tatsugiri. Dondozo now has the option to be attacking for some very strong damage, but Icy Wind coming out first, immediately negating one of those speed boosts.
Yeah, but it only did about 7, 8 damage points, so not going to be taking a lot of damage there. And here's the fun calculation. I believe if that Urshifu was at full health, it would have taken more recoil from the Rocky Helmet than damage it dealt with the critical hit there. Dondozo, especially once Commander has been activated and it gets those stat boosts, is such a scary Pokemon. And if Rajan didn't bring something that can counter it, you know, I think he's going to really struggle coming up. And looking at his team, you have to assume the Ogerpon's the next one to come out onto the field.
Quite possibly, yeah. I actually think that was a kind of a clever play by Rajan, though. You go for the surging strikes. Like you said, Gabby, you really can't switch it out and back in because of those toxic spikes that have been set up. And by going for surging strikes and knocking itself out, you're not giving Dondozo the chance to go for Order Up, which we did see Steven actually opt for. So the Dondozo is still at +2 attack. Order Up did not connect, so the attack boost does not come through. Now the Indeedee comes in to try and possibly support this Flutter Mane. Maybe, you know, try and get some damage down on the weaker special defense side of this Dondozo sitting on Steven's side of the field.
And you also have your own Rocky Helmet, so,
true.
You know,
yeah.
that might actually be doing more damage at this point. You never know. But what I do also find interesting here about this board state is that there was a technical difficulty. That wasn't the interesting thing I was going to talk about, but I just got word in my ear that there has been a bit of a technical difficulty, so we are going to just to take a moment here, see what the judges rule and see what will happen moving forwards in this set. But, you know, having the Indeedee and the Flutter Mane on the field against Dondozo, the point I actually wanted to make was that you could just keep redirecting damage. I mean, yes, the Dondozo has access to Earthquake, so if it wanted to, it could hit both of the Pokemon for damage, but if you expect an Order Up, if you expect a Wave Crash or the other attacks there, Flutter Mane can just kind of sit on the field and do whatever it wants, really. You're going to need a few critical hits and maybe like 5 or 6 turns, but you can get through there.
I think the next couple of turns were probably going to be a bit of a slog. The Dondozo, again, it does have access to Earthquake, so you can attack around the Follow Me, but if you're using an Earthquake without the same type attack bonus, probably not going to be the most, you know, greatest of damage output coming out, especially considering Indeedee and in this case a speed boosting bulkier Flutter Mane probably trained to be more defensively oriented. So it might have taken a few turns for damage to come out, which might have allowed Rajan some time to trade back as well. So it would have been interesting to see how that plays out.
Yeah, so while we're waiting for an update on how this match will proceed, let's take a look at our crowd, as this is one of the biggest regional events so far. I don't know if it's bigger than Charlotte, but it's certainly up there.
Probably pretty close.
I think it's very close. I think it might be slightly less people just because Charlotte was very huge. But
Yeah.
it's incredible to see just how many trainers have come out here this weekend to compete, to spectate, to hang out. I saw some people hitting up the GameCubes over in the free play area earlier on my way in. Like, it's a good time.
That's funny. I mean, it's crazy. Orlando is always one of the bigger regionals.
Yeah.
It's a pretty accessible place to get to, and obviously a very fun location. You know, everyone loves a nice little Orlando vacation. And I was talking to a friend about that the other day, and he said something to the effect of, well, Orlando is just the biggest event of all time every year.
It really is.
Which, I mean, like last year, I know for a fact it was. I think Charlotte this year beat it, and we're very close to that number this year. So it's just always fun to see everyone come out. Especially, I think it's even more impressive now that we're like at the very end of Regulation F. I think that might be a time people sometimes tend to take breaks in their schedule, you know, especially after a big international championship like EUIC we just had. But everyone loves Orlando, loves VGC so much that they always come back.
I mean, I think I'm a criminal Orlando Regionals attender.
Oh, yeah.
Because I think I've gone to almost every single one, if not every single one. So, yeah, I feel that.
I mean, it's fun. How could you not? Disney's right down the road.
Yeah, there's certainly a lot to do here. And what I want to shout out as well is that there are some really fun side events happening this weekend, too. You know, I felt very fortunate that at EUIC last weekend, I got my one side event in. I was able to play a box draft.
Oh, cool.
So have you ever done like a trading card game draft?
I have, yeah.
Okay. So for those of you at home who haven't, you're basically given a booster pack of Pokemon. Not actual Pokemon cards, mind you. It lists like the Pokemon, the held item, the Terra type, the attacks, the nature, and I think one other thing that's slipping my mind.
Cool.
And you pick one, and then you pass your pack to the left, and then you pick another, and you pass to the left, and you just keep going to build a team. And I was able to build a Sun team.
Oh,
and I
really
had a lot of fun. I lost to the guy who drafted Dunsparce with Serene Grace, Rockslide, Glare. And I believe there was also a Palpitoad that had some, or not Palpitoad, excuse me, Bellybolt. The electric one.
They do look very similar.
With Zap Cannon, which is guaranteed to paralyze.
Yes, it is.
And I had a very bad time in that matchup.
No.
But it was a lot of fun.
Yeah.
And there's similar side events going on here as well, which is really exciting.
Have you heard of Chaos Cup?
I have.
Are you familiar with it?
I'm very familiar with Chaos Cup.
I am not. Outside the hall this morning, I heard someone, I saw someone like reading the list of side events, and they were like, what's Chaos Cup? And I thought, like, you know, I don't actually know either.
What do you think it is? I want to hear what your guess is before I tell you.
I think I have like an educated guess because I've heard of something like this before, but I think you're just given a random team of 6 Pokemon and you're told, here's your team, go have fun.
Yes, that is correct.
That does sound fun and chaotic.
They are real teams. This isn't like RNG Chaos Cup where you're given like a one-hit knockout move and it's just, you know, whoever hits it first wins. So there was a Chaos Cup at EUIC that had teams that were based off previous VGC formats, which was really exciting.
Yeah.
Obviously, they were played in Scarlet and Violet, so you couldn't have Mega Evolution as a mechanic. You couldn't have any Z moves or anything, but the inspiration was there, which was really cool. And I believe at this tournament, I don't know what format they're running the Chaos Cup in, but I did just get confirmation from a little birdie in my ear that they're doing old format VGC side events as well here. So
that's fun.
If you are old like me, apparently, you can go play those. Or if you just want to see, you know, VGC history, I know that there's a lot of speculation that Megas are coming back and Legends ZA.
Please.
I mean, they showed the logo,
right?
I
know, it has to. They have to.
It's a great opportunity to just kind of see what those formats were like and maybe think, hey, in 2, 3, 4 years, if we're playing with Megas again, these are the kinds of strategies we can use.
Oh my gosh. I saw that trailer for Legends ZA and I was so excited at the Mega symbol. Mega Evolutions are like my favorite, just stating my bias, but I love like the old formats like 2015, 2018 with the Megas, and you know, the whole Pokedex available to us. So I'm hoping for something like that. I know maybe some people like, you know, Terrestrialization more than Megas. I think it's up there, but it's kind of fun to compare all the old formats with the different generation mechanics as well.
It is. I think Terrestrialization is my favorite competitive mechanic, just because it feels very balanced.
I'd have a hard
and
time
very
arguing
flexible.
against that.
Yeah.
I must admit.
But Megas is the coolest mechanic, because if I had to choose between my Pokemon wearing a cool crystallized hat, my Pokemon just becoming the best version of itself and optimizing and, you know, taking that Mega Evolution energy to go one step further beyond.
Or just being
or
big.
just doing like a dance or being big. I'd pick the perfect evolution.
I agree, for sure.
Okay, cool. Glad we're on the same page. See, this is why we're working together this weekend.
Of course.
But yeah, I believe we're taking a look at some of the video game players who are currently in the middle of their round 3. It looks like there's a lot of people who have finished up. Prize wall. I wish I had time to hit up the prize wall this weekend.
The prize wall is always really well stocked. A lot of cool plushes, a lot of booster packs, a lot of like unique merchandise. That's how when you play the side events that we were talking about earlier, you get your points that you go take to the prize wall, and you get some cool stuff to take home.
Yeah, I was at EUIC, and I remember looking at the prize wall there, and they had a bunch of stuff from the Pokemon Center that isn't necessarily in stock anymore in the US.
Oh.
I missed it, but they had Porygon, Porygon 2, and Porygon Z pins.
Oh.
And I wish that I would have seen that.
That would have been good for EUIC specifically, too.
I know, right? Very thematic, all things considered. But I know at the prize walls here, it's a nice mix of like Pokemon Center merchandise, they'll have playmats from previous tournaments.
Yeah.
A lot of plushies, a lot of like hats and stuff. Good stuff.
Yeah.
Good stuff.
Always fun. Again, like, anytime you attend a Pokemon tournament, whether it's in a city like Orlando with a bunch to offer, or some other different city that may or may not have, you know, giant theme parks right outside your door, there's always things to do right here inside the venue as well. Between side events, there's a bunch of different, you know, trading card game things going on. They have the retro game setups, which are always really fun. You get to play some like Pokemon Stadium mini games. If you ever see us doing that on stream in between rounds and you want to partake, there's the gaming generation set up right outside here.
And not only that, it's like the OG hardware too.
Oh yeah.
Like I know you can play them with the Nintendo Switch Online subscription.
Yeah.
But that all being said, it looks like we are starting to tune in back to our match as players are currently getting reconnected for battle. So before we talk about this matchup in particular, and while we wait to hear the judges' ruling on how we're going to continue this match, it looks like we're just starting over, but I would like to get some confirmation on that, please. We have a couple of new 3-0s. Olivia Molizinski, Lucas Paz, Ryan Almeida, and Jackson Ferris are all 3-0, and I did just get confirmation that we are just going to pretend that first game never happened. We're starting fresh, 0-0. Players probably will take information that they learned in that first part of that game moving forwards into this matchup, so that could be an interesting thing for us to talk about.
Of course.
But as far as the score is concerned, we just had a nice little stroll around the venue, and now we're getting started with round 3.
Yeah, of course. Like, it is a true reset. You know, players are not obligated to lead the same 2 Pokemon. They are free to make whatever decision they choose. But of course, they do have some information. You know, we know, you know, the Fluttermane Urshifu lead. We know the Dragonite Glamora lead. Those were their Game 1 plans originally. We know the Aerial Ace critical hit doesn't even KO the Urshifu, which is like...
That's nuts to me, honestly.
It is nuts, and it's also just really good for Rajan to know. Of course, it was very close. Possibly a roll can change that. But like, worst case scenario, your Urshifu is around 80%. You know you need to take an Aerial Ace. You can probably survive it, which might be big info going into this match.
Yeah, and I think the thing that I want to take away from that in particular is that this Urshifu, it seems very fast.
Yeah.
It seems very bulky, which means it's probably not as invested in its physical attack as some of the other Urshifus, which could make sense if you look at the choice band item in particular, which would make up for, you know, not going full in on those base stats for your attack.
Right, yeah, when you got that choice band, you maybe don't need to fully index into that attack stat. You got some help with your item. You got some help with the Helping Hand in DD as well. I believe the Torrent has Rain Dance.
Yes.
So you can even further boost up those Surging Strikes. And possibly, I mean, there might be a world where you want to like Helping Hand or Rain Dance before you Surging Strikes the Glamora, so you only set up 1 layer of Toxic Spikes as well. It's also some info Rajan got that, you know, no matter what, I have this very, very strong Urshifu. It will still take 2 hits, which means the double Toxic Spikes going up.
Yeah, and while it doesn't seem like a lot necessarily in the moment, The way that toxic poison works compared to normal poison is normal poison does a set amount of damage every single turn.
Yes.
Whereas the toxic poison, the 2 layers of spikes, the icon actually is like a black to dark purple gradient, which is really, honestly, unnerving to me. You will take more damage every single turn. But it looks like we are getting an adjustment from Rajan here with that Ursaluna and the Tornadus as the lead. That's not a Trick Room setup.
It sure is not. That is an Ursaluna right next to a Tornadus. Makes a lot of sense because you are running Earthquake, a spread move that hits everything on the field, other than flying types, of course, both of which Tornadus and Dragonite are, but heavily threatening this Glamora with a big Earthquake or Headlong Rush right off the bat, which again, would activate the Toxic Debris, but considering Glamora is double weak to that ground move, only 1 hit, surely enough to knock it out, unless there is some Terastallization going on as well.
Yeah, Ursaluna also would benefit from a Mortal Spin being the attack of Glamora here, just because it would poison it most likely before it could attack this turn, which means it would potentially get the Guts activation a turn sooner. Instead, though, Steven not going to risk the Glamora's health at this stage in the game. We'll switch immediately into the Dondozo, which does have a more favorable type matchup against the Ursaluna, and it's actually a double switch, so just going straight for that Dondozo Tatsugiri combination we saw earlier on.
You don't see this too often. A lot of times you kind of want to take advantage of the fact that Tatsugiri will kind of clear out that 1 slot and get that immediate boost for Dondozo right off the bat. But Steven, knowing, possibly not in a great position right now, Dragonite not threatening too much damage, and Glamora really hates facing down that Ursaluna, knowing that Dondozo can swap in here without taking a whole lot of damage, especially considering the special attacker just used Protect.
Yeah, and it's possible here. A double Protect means that Steven was able to rotate that Dondozo into the field and really get a favorable positioning already in turn number 2 for free.
Yeah, that worked out really well. Dondozo now on the field. It has that boost from the Commander ability. You have to respect the play from Rajan as well. You really want to protect your Ursaluna before it can, start doing any damage, start taking any damage itself, to activate the Flame Orb, get the Guts boost going with the burn.
So this is what I want to see here. So we have a Tailwind now behind this Ursaluna, and it is able to outspeed the Dondozo. Isn't able to do a lot of damage because of that Commander boost, but still great information for Steven moving forwards. This might not be a minimum speed Ursaluna, and also Order Up, missing the knockout onto that Tornadus. Of course, now the Dondozo has an additional stage of attack boost, so that's something that you have to be very careful about.
Well, that Facade still did a lot of damage. That is a +2 defense Dondozo. That just kind of goes to show you the raw power of Ursaluna. The double power, base power Facade because it's burned, the attack from Guts, and now 1 or 2 more Facades, plus possibly a Bleak Wind Storm to hit the Dondozo on its weaker special defense could be enough damage here.
Yeah, no attacks though from the Dondozo this turn. Instead, both the Ursaluna and Dondozo protecting as Bleak Wind Storm misses its target.
One thing I'd also love to point out here, because of the Rocky Helmet on the Dondozo, a lot of times people running Dondozo will love to protect, possibly stall out Tailwinds, and get some leftovers recovery, which is really big for such a bulky Pokemon like Dondozo with those boosts. Unfortunately for Steven, even though the Rocky Helmet does come in handy against the Ursaluna, against the Urshifu, both of which have contact moves that will get some chip damage on them because of that Rocky Helmet, you no longer have access to leftovers. There's no grassy terrain, there's no Heal Pulse, Pollen Puff anywhere on this team, so any damage into Dondozo sticks, which when you're placing against a Dondozo is very important.
Here comes that Bleak Wind Storm, bringing the Dondozo down to just below half of its health, which means with a Facade, Dondozo is able to hold on with just a little HP left. Wave Crash will connect with the Ursaluna and take that KO.
It might KO itself too, though. That Wave Crash does recoil, and with only 13 HP remaining, this Dondozo is no longer part of the game. Trading KOs here, so the whole boosted Dondozo, you did a bunch of damage to Tornadus, you knocked out your Ursaluna, but now you're just left with your Tatsugiri, Glamora, and Dragonite, and you haven't even seen Rajan's third Pokemon yet.
Yeah, that's a really interesting trade, I think, for Steven, given that the Dondozo seemed like it was trying to set itself up for the long end game in the first time we watched these two players play. But now in this pseudo game 2, if you will, it does seem like the Dondozo was able to do what it needed to do. It got rid of Rajan's most threatening attacker, and now that the Urshifu is on the field for Rajan, the Dragonite is able to find alignment against it, and with 2 Aerial Aces, it should be able to pick up the KO, and I don't think that the the Urshifu can match that amount of damage pressure.
I agree. This Dragonite is definitely the thing that Steven has on his team that is most well equipped to face this Urshifu, obviously resisting both the fighting and water water-type stab moves. There was no Ice Spinner on it. Poison Jab is the coverage move of choice. Instead of going straight for extreme speed, though, not wanting to focus on the Urshifu just yet, picking off this Tornadus.
Yeah, no more speed control for Rajan, assuming that the Tornadus was his only choice in that regard. But close combat is enough to secure the one-hit knockout onto Steven's Tatsugiri before it can attack.
You know, I'm so used to Urshifu running like Mystic Water or Choice Scarf or Focus Sash that the close combat damage is never boosted. It's always, you know, the water type moves, even like the dark type ones, sometimes with like black glasses or something, but this is a choice band Urshifu. Every single attack it uses will be boosted, and because Tailwind was still up, easily able to outspeed that Tatsugiri and cleanly knock it out. That's a big turn for Rajan there because he did lose his Tornadus as well, and now this Urshifu is locked on the field against Glomora, which also just might not be able to survive a close combat with that choice band. But Dragonite still actually in a very strong position, especially now that Urshifu is lowering its defense with that close combat. One Aerial Ace possibly takes it out, and Dragonite is also one of the best Pokemon against Ogerpon, resisting both fire and grass, and being immune to the Stomping Tantrum it carries as well. So even though this Urshifu has been doing a lot of damage, Dragonite here might still be enough for Steven to close out this game.
Yeah, it's a tough spot for Rajan to be in, especially knowing that it was the Ogerpon Hearthflame form as his final Pokemon. I think if it was the Fluttermane instead, like we saw earlier, it would be able to deal some super effective damage to that Dragonite or force it to Terrastalize into the normal type that it carries, which would have meant that close combat did do super effective damage and sort of gets him out of that hole. Unfortunately, though, we'll have to lock in the Terrastalization on the Ogerpon so that it doesn't take a lot of poison type damage, but Steven could easily go for rock type damage as well, and I think that's what we'll see after this Ivy Cudgel connects with the Dragonite. It's not very effective, but it does a ton of damage. Close combat into the Glomora will be a one-hit knockout, and therefore, it's Dragonite against the world.
It is Dragonite against the world, and unfortunately for Dragonite, it has already taken a lot of damage. There's Urshifu claiming so many KOs with this huge close combat. I think Choice Band close combat just not something on people's radar too many times. Stomping Tantrum coming through here into the Urshifu, even with the 2 stages of reduced defense, is not enough to KO it. And it looks like Rajan now, with this +1 attack Ogerpon, actually will be able to break through this Dragonite. I forgot sometimes that type charts don't matter when you're a Terrafire Ogerpon with the +1 embody aspect boost, Gabby.
I mean, you're absolutely right that type charts don't matter in that situation. I think we also got a good confirmation of just how the speeds of these Pokemon play out as well. And extreme speed, obviously enough to pick up the KO on that Urshifu after all of those defensive drops, but it should take one more Ivy Cudgel from the Ogerpon to knock out the Dragonite and put Rajan up 1-0 in the set.
I guess for some context there, the Stomping Tantrum into the Urshifu, I bet was probably trying to predict the poison-type Terrastalization into Urshifu.
Yep.
At this point, there is so much damage coming out from Rajan's side that I think even I continued to underestimate with that Choice Band Urshifu, that you kind of have to try and make a call like that. You know, possibly trying to catch Rajan going for Spiky Shield on Ogerpon, so you're not taking that little chip damage. Terrastalizing the Urshifu so you don't get knocked out by Aerial Ace, but Rajan seeing right through that, I think made the smarter play and just going for what was more straightforward. Probably knowing close combat just straight up clears out the Glomora, and then at that point you're already at 2-1. You can probably try and, you know, play your odds that way.
Yeah, I also think that Rajan just had a very offensive back line to the 4 that he brought here, and if you were to try and slow things down at that point in time, you'd almost be playing against how those Pokemon want to be positioned on the field. I mean, going back to the early part of this game number 1, you know, we saw that Dondozo find a really great spot, but because there was no leftovers, because there was no grassy terrain, when it was down into the red, yes, it got the KO on the Ursaluna, but it knocked itself out in return. And I think what we almost saw there was Steven trying to decide, do you go for the wave crash and just hope that you can survive the recoil, or do you order up and hope that you still do enough damage?
Dondozo is much less forgiving when you're not running leftovers or some kind of recovery, just because, you know, it is such a bulky Pokemon once it has those boosts, especially considering the unaware ability. Like, your opponent can't boost its own Pokemon to try and get through those defense boosts. But once you do start taking so much damage, even like uniquely, Rajan's team is 3 very strong physical attackers, which is usually kind of a great spot for Dondozo to be in, but Rajan immediately just breaking through with that Facade. Like, Facade doing about 40% to Dondozo while it's boosted without like a helping hand or a Swords Dance or anything. That is massive, massive damage in context for Dondozo. So I think maybe Steven just didn't like have a great calculation in his head, you know, underestimating how much damage that Ursaluna could do possibly, maybe wanting to go for that wave crash into it the prior turn, so you're not taking 2 facades.
Yeah.
There's some adjustments that can be made there for sure.
I think there's also the adjustment of the Gouging Fire, which is a Pokemon that is typically known to punish physical attackers on the opposing side of the field.
Yeah.
A lot of people run it with booster energy that boosts the speed, then it's the fastest thing on the field, and you go for breaking swipes, outspeed Urshifus, outspeed Ogerpons, and get those attack drops in early. You also can have the option of then boosting up your own Pokemon with Howl, which is what Steven has chosen to do, and then also threaten some burns with Burning Bulwark, though honestly Ursaluna attacking into a Gouging Fire to like proc the burn early would be a really cool play. Don't think we'll see that happen here. But I do think that's a good adjustment for Steven if he is expecting Rajan to bring 3 physical attackers again in this game number 2.
I agree, the Gouging Fire could help, especially with that breaking swipe. But even just looking at Rajan's physical attackers, the Ursaluna wants to be burned. The Urshifu breaks through Burning Bulwark anyway. The Ogerpon can't be burned. And so you're kind of relying on breaking swipe, but then you might be taking spiky shield damage. Like, it could be a little bit tough there. No Gouging Fire right off the bat, though. Chien-Pao is an adjustment, not something we've seen from Steven in either of the first 1 1/4 games we've seen so far. So I like that adjustment. Immediately threaten this Tornadus and the Ursaluna, which we saw in that first game from Rajan. Unfortunately, though, Urshifu on the field instead.
I was going to say, yes, you do threaten the Tornadus with those very powerful Ice-type attacks. Ice Spinner, the one of choice for this Chien-Pao. But then with the Sword of Ruin ability, you're also further boosting the damage of this Urshifu.
Yeah.
And since Urshifu locked in alignment against the Dondozo earlier on in this game, I don't think there's going to be as easy of a trade here to go for Dondozo and for the Ursaluna. And I think getting the Chien-Pao off the field here is really the best thing you can do to try and protect your Dondozo. But this is going to be a tough turn, even with the Commander boost once again.
Yeah, it is. Chien-Pao wanting to preserve its Focus Sash and also want to give the Dondozo this Commander boost. Again, all 5 of Dondozo's stats being boosted by 2 stages. You've seen it many times over the past 2 years. We're all familiar with Dondozo Tatsugiri, but we're going to have to see how Rajan responds.
It's been a while, though.
It has, you're right.
I'm trying to think of the last time I sat down and watched a Dondozo match, and it has been a hot minute, I would say. Order Up doing about 50% damage to that Urshifu and getting Dondozo an attack boost of its own. Close combat!
That's still so much damage.
You say that so much, but it really isn't.
It is, okay, it is and it isn't, right?
Yeah.
So it's not in the sense that it did, maybe 35% of Dondozo's total HP. When you're considering that's a +2 defense Dondozo, which has a massively high base defense stat, that is a lot of damage for something that is essentially just neutral damage, right?
True.
That choice band coming through again, and now again there's no recovery on this Dondozo. You have to attack single target moves right now because Earthquake will only hit one of the Pokemon, considering Torn is a flying type. If you're allowing Tornadus to continue staying on the field, you get it to fire off some Bleak Wind Storms, set up Tailwinds, possibly lower your speed with Bleak Wind Storm as well. So you have to manage these 2 Pokemon on the other side of the field, and Rajan's doing a great job threatening damage this whole time.
Tailwind means that the Urshifu will outspeed the Dondozo, bring it down into the yellow. Dondozo now, the final Pokemon to attack, could score a knockout easily onto this Urshifu with another Order Up, leaving it with it's about as much health as it could expect in this situation, and I think more importantly as well, further boosting its attack one stage. Whatever Pokemon Rajan sends in next, he has to be very careful about it because yes, you could just target the Tornadus, probably get a 1-hit knockout, but if I had to pick between targeting the Pokemon that's going to Bleak Wind Storm and potentially miss its attacks, or maybe try to set up Rain for some reason, I'm going to choose the other Pokemon, because if it's that Flutter Mane, if it's the Ursaluna, if it's the Ogerpon, that is really the Pokemon in this situation that's going to be looking to break through the Dondozo.
It is. It's a great point. You kind of do have to target the slot that's not the Tornadus in this case. The Ursaluna now coming in does not have its Guts boost just yet, so Rajan will have to take a turn to either protect it or try and possibly bait an attack into the Tornadus and not waste a turn on protect. But now this Dondozo at +4 attack, it is relatively low health, I believe. A Guts boosted Facade probably knocks it out from here, and we've seen the Ursaluna and Dondozo interact in Tailwind. We know Ursaluna should be faster, but again, it does not have its Guts boost just yet. There's no way Ursaluna can KO. You might have to rely on hitting a Bleak Wind Storm at the same time, but if you opt to protect Ursaluna, that could be a window for Steven to open up and attack the Tornadus instead. So it's rough. Like you said, Gabby, I do think Ursaluna is a bigger threat. You maybe don't want to target Tornadus with your Dondozo here, but maybe it's the best play.
It's a tough call, and the Tornadus is the Pokemon to use Protect. We'll have to see if Ursaluna is right behind it. Once again, Rajan going for a double Protect on the turn that you use Flame Orb to activate Guts. Order Up will not connect with the Tornadus as a result.
I mean, that's just smart from Rajan, I think. Like, sometimes it might be a little questionable to double Protect while your own Tailwind is up, but in this case, it is certainly the best play. You don't open yourself up to getting red, you know, Steven targeting the one slot you don't protect. And in this case, again, I think Visage should be enough to KO this Dondozo, especially when you consider the possibility of some Bleak Wind Storm chip damage, and then the Tornadus will be sticking around later on into this game, which could reset up Tailwind later on.
Yeah, I was gonna say, even if the Tornadus, you know, took damage that turn, or if Tailwind ran out, as long as it's not knocked out, it is going to be the fastest Pokemon on the field, since Dondozo doesn't have access to priority, which means you can easily just set Tailwind up once again. But Dondozo was the Pokemon to protect last turn, and now with one turn of Tailwind remaining, looks like Steven is opting to target that Tornadus. We'll have to see if he gets the opportunity.
It's going to be tough. Again, I think Facade maybe is enough, but if it's not, the Bleak Wind Storm damage should make up the difference. And that would bring Steven down to just 3 Pokemon remaining to match Rajan's 3. We did see the Chien-Pao, and we did catch a glimpse of the Gouging Fire, which did get brought to this second game, which actually, if the Gouging Fire and Chien-Pao can hit the field at the same time, that is actually a pretty big threat of damage, especially considering Howl.
Yeah, well, there's the little bit of chip from the Bleak Wind Storm onto that Dondozo, getting a speed drop as well, and Facade from the Ursaluna following up for the knockout.
Yeah, Facade enough to take out Dondozo. You do get some more Rocky Helmet chip damage, and of course the burn is starting to add up as well, so Ursaluna not possibly as healthy as you might want it to be just after taking a KO. Tatsugiri pops out of Dondozo and is there on the field to help out its friends. It is running Helping Hand, which is interesting too.
Yeah.
Gives both the Gouging Fire and the Chien-Pao the option for some greater firepower. But again, Tailwind is just got to be set up again, I imagine, if you're Rajan there, to set up both the Ursaluna and the unrevealed 4th Pokemon.
Yeah, you know, this Tatsugiri is interesting to me as well for its held item with that Citrus Berry. I almost want it to have a Choice Scarf in this situation, because then you don't have to worry as much about speed control. That's most likely the Tatsugiri would outspeed the Ursaluna and Tailwind at that point in time. And even though you're attacking with Muddy Water at that point, at least you can deal some super effective damage and just hope that the accuracy rolls in your favor. This is a tough call for Steven here, though. You know, on the one hand, if you send in the Gouging Fire, you can start lowering the Ursaluna's attack power. You can try and slow down the game pace a little bit to allow Tatsugiri to get caught up. But if you send in the Chien-Pao, then, you know, you're basically forcing the Tailwind this turn, as it is a very fast Pokemon. And you have the Focus Sash to ensure that your opponent would have to attack you twice for the knockout. So I do think Chien-Pao is the right Pokemon to be on the field here, but it's still a very tough spot for Steven.
It is, and I have to wonder whether or not the Ursaluna even outspeeds Chien-Pao and Tailwind. Ursaluna not the fastest of Pokemon, and so unless Rajan has trained it to be, you know, as fast as it possibly can be, it might still underspeed this Chien-Pao and be threatened by either Ice Spinner or Sacred Sword, or even Sucker Punch if you're trying to call the possible Ghost Terastallization, or maybe even like a max speed Ursaluna isn't enough for Chien-Pao. It's going to be a speed interaction. It's going to be very important for this game going forward.
Well, here is the first Terastallization of this game number 2, and it's the Tornadus into a Steel-type Terastallization, so no longer taking super effective Ice-type damage, but that might not stop this Chien-Pao since it does have Sacred Sword on its roster. Protect from the Tatsugiri will ensure it won't take any damage this turn, and Ursaluna matches it with its own Protect, waiting for Tailwind to be fully set up before going on the offense. Ice Spinner into the protecting Ursaluna, and there was no attack from that Tornadus just yet, which means it's going for a Bleak Wind Storm, trying to break that Focus Sash. Will it get it? It does.
It is enough damage to break Focus Sash, obviously, bringing Chien-Pao down to under half of its remaining HP. Importantly, the speed drop does not come through. Chien-Pao still at its neutral speed, and if the speed drop did come through, I imagine that is easily enough for a Tailwind to make up that speed difference. Now, I do think you still have to worry about whether or not Ursaluna is faster than Chien-Pao in Tailwind, as we did see the Tornadus Terastallized. There is no longer an option for Rajan to do the same with Ursaluna. You have to keep this Ice Spinner and Sacred Sword weakness for the rest of the game, and if Chien-Pao is attacking before Ursaluna, that's going to be really, really difficult for Ursaluna to get an attack in.
Yeah, it's going to be very difficult indeed, but You know, looking at the damage that the Tornadus did that previous turn with Bleak Wind Storm, I can't help but wonder if you just have these 2 Pokemon attack here, and if Bleak Wind Storm connects, you might get it. It looks like it's going to be a damage roll, honestly. And then if the Chien-Pao is faster, which it was, but it was because of Sucker Punch. Sucker Punch missing the knockout as well, which means that this Ursaluna can go straight for an Earthquake, going to knock out all 3 Pokemon on the field. That was a one-hit knockout on the Tornadus.
The double KO, yes.
On the Chien-Pao, or not the Chien-Pao, on the Tatsugiri. And then Chien-Pao as well gets
That's
the
so
KO.
funny.
But Rajan not only clearing the field, giving him an opportunity to send in his own final Pokemon, and we'll just have to see how that's going to match up against the Gouging Fire we know that Steven has in the back.
Like, honestly, optimal, right? Like, a lot of the times, we talk about on stream sometimes, like, you know, if you set up Tailwind to get knocked out at the same turn, that can be a really good thing for you. And Rajan took that into his own hands, said, I'll just knock it out myself. I mean, I'm a Steel type now, I can Earthquake myself.
Honestly, like, I was looking at the team sheet, and I was like, okay, Covert Cloak with Terra Steel, that makes a lot of sense. You don't necessarily need Terra Ghost if you're running Covert Cloak, but then that synergy as well. Tornadus is a flying type Pokemon. It does not have the Levitate ability, so as long as you lose that flying typing, you can just hit it with your own Earthquakes, and it worked out very well for him there. Now Ogerpon is on the field at full health, ready to go on the offense against this Gouging Fire. I'm not sure if it's necessarily going to match the damage that a Heat Crash would put out, but I'm assuming that 2 Stomping Tantrums should be enough.
It's going to be close, I think. Breaking Swipe is a great option here. You're going to be lowering the attack of this Ogerpon, which cannot Terastallize, get that Embody Aspect boost, and importantly, you have the option for Burning Bulwark, which will stall out a turn, possibly allow this Ursaluna to knock itself out with 1 more turn of burn. I think it might be 2 turns away. It'll be very close. Stomping Tantrum, though, does go into the Burning Bulwark, as does Facade. No burns coming through, obviously, because Ursaluna already burned. Ogerpon, Fire type, can't be burned. And Ursaluna here takes another turn of burn damage.
It's able to hold on!
It does survive, which means that Gouging Fire now pretty much has to go for Breaking Swipe, which is much, much less damage than this Heat Crash. You might not have enough time to get damage into this Ogerpon before it can Stomping Tantrum you down.
It's going to be very, very close, and it's all going to come down to just how these Pokemon are trained. How many Stomping Tantrums will it take to knock out the Gouging Fire? The Ursaluna has done such a great job for Rajan in this matchup in all of his previous events, but goes for the Ivy Cudgel into the Gouging Fire, does outspeed the Gouging Fire as well, which is important to note for the remainder of the Tailwind turns at least. And then Steven able to get the KO onto the Ursaluna before it can attack.
I believe Steven has not Terastallized this game, which is exactly why Rajan went for the Ivy Cudgel, possibly trying to predict that Fairy-type Terastallization, which would mitigate damage from Stomping Tantrum, but unfortunately going a little bit too far there. Stomping Tantrum into the Burning Bulwark on this turn obviously will not be enough, and especially now that Ogerpon is at -1 attack, this might actually be pretty well in Steven's favor going forward.
I was going to say, it's a tough endgame, you know, do you Terastallize, do you not? Personally, if I were Steven and I were confident that I can take a single Stomping Tantrum, I would wait as long as humanly possible to Terastallize, because then that Mind Game is up on the field for as long as you can. As long as Gouging Fire hasn't Terastallized, Rajan's going to have to guess, do I Stomping Tantrum? Do I go for an Ivy Cudgel?
Yeah.
That all being said, if I were in Rajan's shoes, I would also click Stomping Tantrum until I see the Terastallization. So
it's tough too,
it's
because
a very tough call.
If you're Rajan, I think you want to be using Ivy Cudgel if you can, because you are at -1 attack. You want to try and go for those boosted critical hit chances. Stomping Tantrum here doing very little damage, especially now that Gouging Fire is at +1 attack. You know, Heat Crash is a great option. Breaking Swipe will be doing a lot of damage. You do have to kind of worry about Spiky Shield. You don't want to be taking too much of that chip damage in return. But now -2 attack on this Ogerpon, and Stomping Tantrum coming through here without a crit should not be nearly enough.
I was going to say that was a great use of Howl there from Steven. Typically a move used to boost your partner Pokemon's attack power. Works fine on yourself as well.
Yeah.
And actually makes Breaking Swipe what appears to be a 2-hit knockout onto this Ogerpon. So Ogerpon does go for Spiky Shield this turn, which means that the Gouging Fire will take a little bit of recoil damage from that. But it's a tough call to say if that's going to put it within knockout range of a Stomping Tantrum. Instead, just will outspeed and pick up the KO with a Breaking Swipe, and we have ourselves a game number 3.
All right, Gouging Fire coming through there with some really, really nice plays. I think Rajan might have been in a much better position had he gone for the stopping tantrum right off the bat. I think he maybe got a little bit too ahead of himself trying to predict Steven's Terastallization in a scenario where if you do get it wrong, you're so far behind.
Yeah,
and again,
I agree.
maybe if you do a little bit more damage with Ivy Cudgel, that can be a worthwhile trade-off later on, especially if you try and weave in some, spiky shields to get some more chip damage, catching Steven going for those breaking swipes. But because Steven held on to that Terastallization, didn't even use it throughout the entire game, we saw him able to come out on top thanks to those breaking swipes, lowering Ogerpon's attack, and the Howl, like you called out, Gabby, making breaking swipe a 2-hit KO in the very end.
Yeah, I can't help but wonder as well what the end game would have looked like for Rajan if he hadn't gone for the Terastallization on the Tornadus. I feel like it was a really cool play. It really opened up the field for him to allow him to get that Ogerpon on the field. However, once you do that, you can't then Terastallize your Ogerpon to offset one attack drop from that breaking swipe. And I think at the ultimate end of the game, that was the more important thing for Rajan. I loved the strategy here. Seeing this Ursaluna, quite frankly, outspeed a ton of Pokemon and deal some really good damage here is a great approach for Rajan in this matchup. Just really wanted to keep that Tornadus around on the field at full health, threaten those Bleak Wind Storms, and then save that Terastallization for the Ogerpon.
I think specifically what the Terastallization on that Tornadus did for Rajan was that if Steven opted to go for Ice Spinner into that slot, instead of it getting KO'd, it easily survives an Ice Spinner with that Steel typing. Assuming you hit the Bleak Wind Storm, which can be a big assumption, you do break that Focus Sash. And that's exactly what Rajan got out of that turn as well. Just didn't pay off in the end like he wanted it to.
Yeah, and that's a tough call to make as well at the end of the day. Like, do you want to try and survive this turn, or do you want to preserve your Terastallization for an end game? And I think going into this game number 3, that's really the conversation that Rajan should be having with himself. How do I approach this matchup? I know that my opponent's probably going to bring Dondozo Tatsugiri again because Steven's been very comfortable with starting the game off with that mode and really just starting things off very aggressively with those turn 1 commander boost activations. How do I best match that? And I think that the Choice Band on the Urshifu is probably a good place to start with that. And maybe a little bit of an earlier Ogerpon as well, but you do have to watch out for the water type attacks that Dondozo has.
I do have a question for you, Gabby.
Yes.
We talked earlier that Steven is one of the OG players. He's been playing for a long time.
Yes.
I don't think we've seen him Terastallize yet this match.
Yes.
Do we think he knows that Terastallization exists?
Are we
sure?
No,
I mean, certainly, I don't think there were many scenarios where he needed to. So, it was obviously a very conscious choice for him not to throughout those first 2 games. It's just funny that we're in a game 3 and we have seen one player Terastallize both games and one player Terastallize neither game yet.
I think this is a plus point, though, for Terastallization being a really balanced mechanic because sometimes the absence of it is just as powerful as the presence of it.
And the mere threat of it, like we saw in the last game, going for the Ivy Cudgel into the Fire Dragon type, that was because Terastallization was on the field. So it's a tool whether you're using it or not.
All right, well, game number 3, Steven, turn 1, once again, will switch in that Tatsugiri to activate the Commander stat boost onto that Dondozo. We saw it able to take a close combat from that Choice Band Urshifu very comfortably in games number, actually, I think 1 and 2, honestly. So I'm very curious if we're going to see that play out here again, or if maybe we'll see some Rain Dance action? Nope, just to protect from that Tornadus.
Rain Dancing in front of a Dondozo seems a little bit risky. You really don't want to be boosting those wave crashes. Steven going for order up straight into Urshifu again, not attacking into that protect, which is crucial. You still get the attack boost. From that order up, you deal some good damage to Urshifu. Between the attack boost and the defense drop, one more order up should be enough damage to KO Urshifu as well. I think that's kind of exactly the same trade we saw at the beginning of game 2 as well.
Yeah, and trading the Dondozo for the Urshifu in particular, I think works out very well for Steven, as Urshifu, again, Choice Band, close combat, one of the most powerful attacks in the game on sheer damage alone. And just being able to have that pressure and remove one of your opponent's biggest attackers from the beginning is so important. While Tornadus is still at full health, it can provide support for the Urshifu, but Tailwind not going to be as relevant at this point in time. Does make me wonder if he'll wait and just opt to keep using Bleak Wind Storm to slowly chip down on that Dondozo's health instead.
Slowly chip down on Dondozo's health, possibly get some speed drops, which would come in handy. Maybe one speed drop might be enough for Urshifu to still attack first. Tailwind, though, coming out right away from Tornadus, ensuring that Urshifu is going to be attacking before one more order up. Close combat will do another good chunk of damage into that Dondozo. Again, take some Rocky Helmet chip damage, lower its defense down to -2 stages, and Dondozo will have the opportunity to attack once more.
Yeah, but Rajan, I think, making a great call here, opting to Tailwind on the final turn that Tornadus is on the field. Not KO'd by its own partner Pokemon this time. Instead, Wave Crash is the move to take it out, and because it was at full health, the recoil damage it does to that Dondozo is absolutely critical. It looks like it might be within range of one more close combat knocking it out.
And we're now in an interesting spot where, for the first time in this set, Rajan has the opportunity to KO Dondozo and damage Tatsugiri at the same time. For the whole match so far, we've seen something knock out Dondozo as like the last action of the turn, which means Tatsugiri just kind of pops out and sits there having a jolly good time. But now, just to remind everyone at home, if you do KO Dondozo, the Tatsugiri immediately pops out of its mouth, is vulnerable to taking an attack. We see Fluttermane come in here with the speed boosting Photosynthesis. A Moonblast will KO Dondozo. A close combat we've seen will KO Tatsugiri. This is a clean 2 knockouts just sitting on a plate for Rajan. Steven cannot switch. He cannot protect against, well, he could protect against the Fluttermane. Actually, that's a nice way to possibly make sure that doesn't happen, is if you protect the Moonblast and to get knocked out by close combat instead. But it's a really nice offensive position for Rajan to be in here.
Yeah, Rajan is guaranteed to knock out the Dondozo this turn. It's just a matter of how much damage he can put down onto that Tatsugiri in the same turn. But because Steven goes for protect here, like you said, the Fluttermane will move next. Moonblast will not be able to break through that protect, and then it's all down to Urshifu with its Unseen Fist ability to attack through the protect.
He didn't.
No.
No, that's so smart. Wait,
okay, break that down, break that down.
Dondozo, okay, Unseen Fist. You attack through protect, contact moves.
Yes.
Steven knows that he can protect the Moonblast from Fluttermane. Dondozo will not be knocked out, so that Dondozo gets knocked out by Urshifu instead, which means Tatsugiri doesn't take an attack this turn.
Yes.
Rajan, knowing that, opts to go for the Moonblast into the Dondozo. If Steven doesn't protect, it gets knocked out. Tatsugiri gets close combated, it's fine. By targeting the Tatsugiri slot with the Urshifu, that is such a smart play because you're not giving Steven that option to just not, take the damage of Tatsugiri. Now, and this is a play Rajan can repeat too. You can immediately just Moonblast the Dondozo slot and select the Tatsugiri slot with your Urshifu ad nauseum. If the Dondozo gets 5 protects in a row, that can't go wrong. That's such a good play from Rajan.
That was an incredible play from Rajan. Now, this time around, though, is opting to switch in the Ursaluna. Dondozo fails the double protect, which means that Moonblast will connect and will knock out, but because Tatsugiri was hiding at the beginning of this turn, it will not be able to attack. So doesn't get the opportunity to connect the close combat with it, but does get the opportunity to switch in the Ursaluna and activate Flame Orb. Again, incredible mechanics know-how from Rajan. Just one turn, timing or targeting everything perfectly to ensure that the Tatsugiri would have been hit by something eventually, and then turn 2 just deciding to take advantage of that once again to set up the Ursaluna.
Absolutely another heads-up play to get the Ursaluna in there. If you switch it in on a turn, the Flame Orb does activate at the very end of the turn, so we get the Guts boost right off the bat. We have the option for some very, very strong Facades, Headlong Rushes, Earthquakes as well. And now Fluttermane is on the field. Again, it does have the speed-boosting Photosynthesis, when it should be outspeeding Gouging Fire, even though it also has the speed boost from Photosynthesis, just because Fluttermane does have naturally a much higher speed stat. We do have 1 turn of Tailwind remaining as well on Rajan's side of the field, so if another Icy Wind comes through here, that could possibly allow Ursaluna to take advantage of that Flame Orb, get a big attack off before Tailwind expires.
Rajan taking a moment here to select his moves, trying to find the optimal path to victory. It is worth noting that both these trainers have 3 Pokemon remaining at this point in time. Though it does feel like Steven is on a bit of the back foot, knowing that his Pokemon are not as offensive as Fluttermane, Ursaluna with the Flame Orb activated, and that Urshifu. Burning Bulwark will protect the Gouging Fire for this next turn, and Tatsugiri as well opting for protect here, just trying to scout out what Rajan is thinking. Moonblast would have targeted the Tatsugiri. That most likely would have been a one-hit knockout onto that Dragon-type Pokemon, and then Facade was the move of choice to target down the Gouging Fire.
The Tatsugiri and Gouging Fire, I think a smart protect there from both slots. Again, the Tailwind is now expiring for Rajan's end, and because Tornadus is knocked out, there is no option to possibly set that back up. You get a little bit of chip damage from that burn as well, but most importantly, you know that the Gouging Fire, if it does take an Icy Wind, should still be able to act before the Ursaluna and get off possibly a Breaking Swipe, maybe even like a Heat Crash or some damage into Flutter Mane. And now, if you're Rajan, I think you're still in a pretty strong offensive spot. You've got your Icy Wind Flutter Mane, a Moonblast should threaten a KO and Tatsugiri. And the Tatsugiri's defensive Terrestrialization being Steel means it is very vulnerable to that Ursaluna if it does opt to use that. Let's say Rajan goes for like a Moonblast and Earthquake or something. It still gets knocked out regardless. The Tatsugiri's speed might be interesting here just because it is naturally faster than Ursaluna, but Icy Wind could change that. We'll have to consider here. And finally a Terrestrialization from Stephen Morioka.
Yeah, I think using the knowledge he gained on that previous turn to opt to Terrestrialize the Tatsugiri into that Steel typing, hoping that it can take a Moonblast and retaliate with a Muddy Water to deal some big damage to Ursaluna, but Flutter Mane changing its attack of choice into Icy Wind to drop the speed of the Gouging Fire and Tatsugiri by 1 stage each. Heat Crash will still move next, crashing into that Flutter Mane, bringing it down into the yellow Facade, now outspeeding the Tatsugiri. It's able to hold on through all of that damage and eat its Citrus Berry to heal itself back up, and will get the opportunity to use Muddy Water for the knockout on the Flutter Mane and bring Ursaluna down below half its health.
That was still resisted Facade. That did so much damage, Gabby. That Steel Terrestrialization coming in huge, though, allowing the Tatsugiri to resist both the Icy Wind and the Facade, keeping it around to KO Flutter Mane after a big Heat Crash and allow Steven to have the Pokemon advantage. Notably, the Gouging Fire, again, should still be faster than both Urshifu and Ursaluna. Possibly, actually, the Urshifu might be outspeeding just because, you know, some of those speed training on the Urshifu can be a little bit faster sometimes. Gouging Fire with the speed boosting for the Synthesis might not be max speed, so Urshifu could attack first, which might be, you know, very useful here, except both these Pokemon are still very low. We see the Chien-Pao at full HP in the back for Steven. I think he's set up this endgame very well for himself with a really nice Terrestrialization on Tatsugiri.
Yeah, I think all you really need to do here is go for a Breaking Swipe, possibly even helping Hand Boosted to ensure the KO onto that Ursaluna, but Steven doesn't think he needs it. Goes for a Protect. Surging Strikes from that Urshifu will outspeed the Gouging Fire and deal 3 hits worth of damage, but it is not going to be enough to knock it out. Gouging Fire should be the next Pokemon to attack, and it goes for Breaking Swipe, and it's not enough to pick up the KO onto that Urshifu or that Ursaluna. Let's see who Rajan targeted down with the Facade. It was the Tatsugiri.
It was Tatsugiri, and I think that's probably the best case there. Not taking a KO means that Chien-Pao does not yet hit the field. And this Urshifu, now it is down to very, very low HP, but it is the fastest thing on the field. Should be able to KO either of these Pokemon with the Surging Strikes. And because of the Tatsugiri taking the Icy Wind, it should still be slower than this Ursaluna. But I think even if you're able to take these 2 KOs, like we saw the Urshifu outspeed Gouging Fire, which kind of goes to show, like you mentioned earlier, Gabby, it's got the Choice Band. Maybe you're indexing more into speed in your training. Even if you take 2 KOs here, the Chien-Pao in the back is probably still able to close out the game. I think especially with that Focus Sash and especially access to that priority Sucker Punch if you need to rely on that. It means that it's going to be really tough for Steven to, or rather for Rajan to dispatch it, even though he has the Pokemon advantage here still and can probably take 2 knockouts.
Yeah, I think as soon as Chien-Pao hits the field, you Sucker Punch the Urshifu, you know it's going to connect because it's Choice Band locked into Surging Strikes, which coincidentally will also KO the Gouging Fire this turn. The Ursaluna then attacks the Chien-Pao, brings it down to Focus Sash, and then you just naturally outspeed for that KO.
Exactly.
We will see the Ursaluna move next, I believe, like we saw in the previous turn, going for the Facade into the Tatsugiri for that knockout as well. So we are officially in the Chien-Pao endgame.
It is the Chien-Pao endgame. The Ursaluna and the Urshifu on Rajan's side trying to stare it down. Again, Chien-Pao does not have any of those spread attacks. It is single target attacks only, but thanks to the Tailwind being gone, thanks to the Urshifu being locked into Surging Strikes, it cannot attack before this Chien-Pao. One attack should be able to knock it out. Exactly like you said, Gabby, the Ursaluna probably brings Chien-Pao down to its Focus Sash, but that will not be enough.
Yeah, and this is where I think any damage on that Chen Pao earlier on in the game when it was bled would have been very important, but Steven making a great call, switching it out turn 1 of both games 2 and 3 to send in that Tatsugiri and set up the Dondozo and preserve Focus Sash for this critical endgame. Ends up not needing it as Chen Pao is able to take that headlong rush pretty comfortably, all things considered, and Ursaluna will actually just be knocked out thanks to the burn damage this turn. So Steven Morioka winning this set against Rajan Ball 2-1 in round 3 of Swiss.
That was a really, really interesting set. Some really crazy back and forth. And Rajan had that really, really nice read into Steven, you know, with the Moonblast, with the close combat into the Tatsugiri slot. You kind of think to yourself, maybe, what if Rajan had done the same play on the next turn, immediately gotten the double KO onto that Dondozo and the Tatsugiri instead of swapping in the Ursaluna for the Guts boost?
Yeah.
But thinking back, that just means that the Chen Pao and the Gouging Fire come in immediately. And that, like, sometimes kind of the double swap for free, especially a combination that strong where you have the option for some Howls into Ice Spinners, like maybe that wasn't actually as great for Rajan anyway. Kind of explains the choice not to take that double KO. But some really smart plays on both ends. The final terrestrialization from Steven, I think really the nail in the coffin there, allowing Tatsugiri to stay on the field, get that huge muddy water off, and set up that end game.
I agree, and I think what's also interesting to note is just looking at this set overall, how Dondozo forced trades for Rajan, or for Steven into Rajan, of course. Like game number 1, we saw the Dondozo trade with the Ursaluna. Games 2 and 3, we saw it trade with the Urshifu, sort of.
Right.
And at the end of the day, you really just forced Rajan's central attackers to take a huge amount of damage. And yes, you know, maybe you could have also had a little bit more offensive pressure yourself if you hadn't had that Dondozo, but I think slowing down the game to that point and just forcing your opponent to recognize that situation as well is just so important when you're playing these longer sets.
Also, really just a heads-up use of Dondozo as kind of a piece on a team. A lot of times you're really tempted, you know, if you're using Dondozo, and especially if you're bringing Dondozo to a game, with all those boosts, you kind of get the stars in your eyes, like, oh my gosh, I have all these boosts, I can take so many knockouts with this Pokemon. But Steven using it much differently, kind of starting out the game and getting some chip damage down, setting up his teammates to close out the games, and that was what won the game, was the Gouging Fire, the Chen Pao in the very end, and not specifically the Dondozo, which was more of a setup Pokemon instead.
Yeah, I can't help but wonder, I mean, looking at the team composition for Steven, if there is a mode where you don't bring the Tatsugiri and you just use Howl on Gouging Fire to sort of boost up that Dondozo as well.
Yeah.
I think one of the things that's been really interesting for me to watch throughout the series, the various series of Scarlet and Violet, is how people play Dondozo when Tatsugiri isn't around. You know, I think Dondozo Tinglu is a very popular core right now. And I think Dondozo Gouging Fire as well has some really good synergy that I would love to hear from Steven, you know, if that was something he was considering when he was building this team.
Surely, yeah. I didn't even think about that myself, Gabby. That's a great call out because, you know, of course, you have, you know, the Unaware, which is a great defensive tool against, you know, opposing setup Pokemon. But you also have your own Howl, which can boost, you know, your defenses. Fire and Water are a great combination of types together. And when Dondozo's on the field, most of the time there's nothing next to it.
Exactly.
So there's kind of a different set of pressure that comes out when you have the Gouging Fire as opposed to the Tatsugiri that is locked away inside the Dondozo. So a really cool, unique, you know, way to use that team that we didn't get to see in this round, but possibly Steven is using, you know, first couple rounds, maybe later on today as well.
Or maybe in a previous tournament. You never know.
Of course.
Fortunately, there's so much Pokemon to be played, both here this weekend and online on Battle Stadium. We had those global challenges the past few weeks. There's also, you know, just hanging out with your friends, being like, hey, you want to play some locals or whatever? Yeah.
We're both local hosts ourselves. We're very familiar.
Yeah, you know, I forgot. You're a newly crowned professor.
Yeah,
even. Congratulations.
It's really fun. Thank you. I've hosted 2 Premier Challenges so far. They're very fun. I highly recommend if you're in the DFW area. I'm happy to host you. If you're in Boston, go see Gabby.
Come to the Cheese League.
Yeah, there we go. If you're anywhere else, you know, check Pokemon.com for that event locator to get involved yourself.
Yeah, and I mean, talking about old Pokemon players, I mean, back in the day, that was really the only way to hear about these tournaments.
Yeah.
Like, I remember logging onto the Pokemon website like once a week, checking the news section to see, okay, when's the next tournament season coming? And then when they first announced back in 2006, the Journey Across America tour, where they'd have one tournament in every single state.
Oh, yeah.
I remember my mind was just blown. I was like, oh my God, I only have to drive 2 hours to compete this time around. Let's go.
Oh, yeah. No, there's so much fun. It's a great resources, Pokemon.com. You can see some resources on how to build teams, of course, how to find tournaments. You can see Gabby and Mai's lovely faces, and more than just regionals. And so we highly recommend you go check it out.
Yeah. That being said, we are waiting to get an interview set up with Steven. So while we wait, I'm very, very curious, Jake. You know, we've talked a lot about the Trick Room. We've talked a lot about predictions of Ursaluna this weekend. Did you expect to see Ursaluna in Tailwind?
No.
Yeah, I didn't either. I think that was a really interesting point from Rajan. You know, we didn't get to talk about this at the beginning, but I do want to bring it up now that we have a little bit of time. You know, he's run Ursaluna for the past 4 tournaments, according to his fun fact. And I think being able to recognize how to run Ursaluna without Trick Room is such a cool adaptation to what feels like a other very linear sort of setup. You know, you set up Trick Room, protect Flame Orb, and then you just go on the offense. But Rajan showed us that there's still room for innovation in the format.
There is. I think especially cool because we do see Ndidi on Rajan's team.
Yeah.
It's kind of its own fake out. Like I definitely, and I think also you saw the Ndidi and were like, oh, obviously there's a Trick Room like option
100%.
there.
I didn't even look at the moves.
No, yeah, because of course it runs Trick Room. Why wouldn't it? But no, it has Protect instead. And I think if you're a player facing that team as well, even though we have the team sheets available to us when we are playing, that anyone playing against Rajan today can look at the team sheet and see it doesn't have Trick Room. But it's kind of like a mental exercise you have to go through to think, okay, wait, this Ndidi doesn't have Trick Room. It doesn't have Trick Room. I can't like play around Trick Room. And it's something that I think Rajan probably is taking advantage of because a lot of times people's game plans against Ursaluna kind of assume that Trick Room is up, and maybe that makes you have to play it differently. It's kind of a cool throwback, not even throwback, but kind of reference to a lot of the Ursaluna Blood Moon teams that have kind of the dual Tailwind Trick Room options. We haven't really seen that yet with Ursaluna, like the normal forms specifically, but Rajan taking it here to Orlando, and I think it's a really cool idea.
Yeah, well, Ursaluna was not the top bear in this previous round. It was actually Dondozo, who's now officially a bear. So let's go ahead to the lounge for an interview with Steven and Joe.
Thank you very much, Jake and Gabby. We're here with our round 3 winner, Steven Morioka. A really intense match. I mean, most people play 3 games of VGC, and you and Rajan played 4. So that's where we really gotta start off there. How did you handle the mental strain that it takes to play that much VGC in one set?
It's just a lot of persistence and knowing that you're still in the game and it's going to be a long taxing series and you have to just play it out. You got to play it out. They're going to be technical issues. You can expect that, and that's okay. So you just got to play your best and just see what happens in the games.
Well, I think one of the interesting things with your team composition is a lot of people, especially in Regulation F, have started to stray away from the Dondozo Tatsugiri combination. They're going Dozo, Tinglu, and Porygon, and some other strategies. So what led you back to the original combination that was so popular in the beginnings of Scarlet and Violet, where other people have kind of dropped off of that duo?
Yeah, so the biggest selling point for me, this was maybe right after Knoxville Regionals, is that Dondozo had Unaware, and Unaware I think is just really key to its success and its success on this team right now, mainly because I can pretty much ignore everybody's setup strategies when I have Dondozo on the field, and when Tatsugiri is the commander, we get the +2 boost to all the stats. And I think the biggest key for me is mainly just having a bunch of different options, which is kind of counterintuitive with Dondozo and Tatsugiri when I can't switch anymore. There's only one target on the field there. So there can be a lot of mind games, before they merge together. And then there's still like kind of a pregame and postgame with those two on the field. But I would say the biggest key for me was Unaware, its ability.
Okay, and I think one of the really interesting turns that we were discussing backstage as we were watching this match was there was Dondozo on the field, and then Rajan had his low health Ursaluna and the Urshifu, I believe. No, it was Urshifu and Fluttermane, excuse me. And it seemed like a really intense turn because Rajan targeted into Tatsugiri on purpose to make sure there's no Rocky Helmet damage or he doesn't hit you through Unseen Fist. And then on your end, you protected, but like, were you anticipating an unseen fist to go through your protect anyway? Like backstage, we all popped off on that turn.
Yes, I was actually hoping that Rajan would, double target into Dondozo. I get a little more Rocky helmet damage, and then Tatsugiri gets to come in safely. But Rajan is a smart player, and so purposely targeted a Tatsugiri with Urshifu, knowing that that's what I was planning on my end. So I think I just followed up with tried for another double protect, go for the same play, but he still had a safe option for that second turn anyway. So I knew after that turn, we're just gonna have to go to this later in the end game. But yeah, it's that's a play that has happened to me a few times before in practice. So after he made that play, I was expecting that, or I was ready for what's to come next.
Now, I think at the end of the game, what was interesting was it was just your Chien Pao left on the field at low HP, in the red at that point, and we were looking a couple turns ahead, a couple turns prior to that. We saw an out that was like, okay, you get Chien Pao in with Focus Sash, Urshifu can Ursaluna knocks itself out to the Flame Orb recoil, as well as you have Sucker Punch to outspeed the Choice Banded Urshifu there. So I think that's the thing that for any trainers at home that are new, because you talk about, kind of planning turns ahead, like not just playing on the current turn, but knowing like, okay, if I play towards this out, 3 turns later, I have checkmate because I have Focus Sash, I knock out, and then he knocks himself out to Flame Orb. Like, how do you plan multiple turns ahead without getting too far ahead, if that makes sense?
Right. So Urshifu with Unseen Fist can go through Protect. So I was very conscious of that and knew that Rajan's also had a choice item. So as long as I saw that it did not lock into Aqua Jet, if I could just get in Chien Pao safely without taking any damage, I'm guaranteed a second hit on the Ursaluna. So I just needed to make sure that I get Urshifu down low enough in Sucker Punch range, and as long as I didn't make a mistake and switch in Chien Pao into any of those attacks when Ursaluna and Urshifu were in the end game there, if I could just get it in safely, then I would feel pretty safe with the game at the end.
Yeah, and that is a major factor that it was choice banded on Urshifu, right? Instead of a Focus Sash or Life Orb or Assault, because that completely changes how your decision making, right? Because with the choice band, you knew he can't protect. There's no Sucker Punch mind game. So, can you explain like the difference or how different end games can work out when you're building with your friends? How do you play matchups versus X held item versus Y held item on this Pokemon?
Yeah, so with the different held items in terms of on different Pokemon, if you, obviously with choice items, you know that once they make a decision and lock in that move, that kind of helps make your plans a little bit easier to map out for the rest of the game. In terms of if there's a different item where Urshifu would have been able to change moves, then it would probably come down to a lot of different mind games. Do you protect? Do you go for an Aqua Jet? So that kind of thing. So I'm glad I didn't have to play those mind games because those can be pretty stressful. And otherwise, I just want to give credit to Rajan because we played a really long, great, fun series. There was, I felt like a lot of good plays and reads back and forth. So yeah, I'm wishing him the best moving forward.
Absolutely, that was a fantastic set. Now, before we let you go to get ready for your round 4 match, do you have any shout outs for anybody at home watching along?
Yeah, I'd like to shout out and thank my mom and dad, my sister, my brother who's here playing the trading card game today, and then my friends here as well, Joe, Bob, and Lissa.
All right, so congratulations, Steven, starting the day 3-0. Wish you the best of luck. Hopefully, we'll see you in day 2 tomorrow. But for now, we're going to head back over to the casters for our next matchup. So Gabby and Jake, take it away.